presented by Wyatt Henry.
Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created. Yup, that was the beginning of Lincoln's amazing Gettysburg Address. But before we can get to the speech, we need to go way back to the beginning. February 12, 1809 to be precise. On a small farm near Hodgenville, Kentucky, Abraham Lincoln was born to Thomas and Nancy Lincoln. His father was a poor white farmer who didn't own any slaves. As non-slave owners, the Lincoln farm could not compete with plantations that used slave labor, eventually causing the family to settle on a farm in Little Pigeon Creek in Indiana when Lincoln was around 7 years old. 2 years later, in 1818, the family cows had been munching on white snake root, which is harmless to cows but turns their milk into poison. Sadly, tragedy fell amongst the Lincoln family when his mother drank the tainted cow's milk and died, leaving Lincoln and his father to construct the coffin, and her older sister Sarah to take care of her Lincoln and the cousin they had taken in. A year later, Thomas would remarry a fellow widow, Sarah Bush, who had 3 kids of her own. Lincoln had a good relationship with his stepmother. She even brought him books that had sparked his love for reading. His favorites were the Bible and Aesop's Fables. Abraham only had a year of schooling and was mostly self-taught by reading borrowed books, since he couldn't afford to buy any. One such book that he had borrowed from a neighbor was the copy of The Life of George Washington by Parson Weems. He read it cover to cover multiple times. During a rainstorm, a leaky roof damaged the borrowed book. Not one to tell a lie, he quickly told his neighbor about the damage and asked how he could work off the damage. Honesty was the best policy, as the neighbor allowed Lincoln to keep the damaged book, which was still readable, if he helped pull corn. For 3 days, Lincoln worked hard on the neighbor's farm, but for an avid reader of limited means to buy his own books, it was a small price to pay. When Lincoln was around 21 years old, he set off on his own and moved to New Salem, Illinois, and found a job as a cook on a flatboat that was delivering crops to New Orleans. He was stranded on a boat at least twice, and even saved the crew from a sinking boat by drilling a hole to remove the water. Years later, the memories of being stranded will lead him to invent a means to keep boats afloat with inflatable compartments like a balloon. On March 10, 1849, Lincoln filed a patent for the device, and although it was never produced for practical use, he is the only president to ever receive a government patent while in office. In 1832, Lincoln declared his candidacy for the Illinois House of Representatives, but interrupted his campaign to serve as a captain in the Illinois militia during the Black Hawk War. In his autobiography about returning home from the war, he wrote in the third person saying he studied what he should do. Thought of learning the blacksmith trade, thought of trying to study law. Rather, he could not succeed at that without a better education. Before long, strangely enough, a man offered to sell, and it did sell, to Abraham and another, as poor as himself, an old stock of goods upon credit. They opened as merchants, and he says that was a store. And that is exactly what happened. Lincoln went into business with William Berry in 1833. The Lincoln Berry General Store and Tavern opened. His shop was the local gathering place for townsfolk and tourists. Lincoln lived and breathed that store, often falling asleep at night in the back reading books. He was notoriously trustworthy. Some even say he walked 3 miles to track down a customer he had overcharged by 6.5 cents. However, in 1834, much to his dismay, Lincoln's store failed, but when one door closes, another door opens. Lincoln decided to give politics a try. He even said, if you wish to be a lawyer, attach no consequence to the place you are in or the person you are with, but get books, sit down anywhere, and go reading for yourself. That'll make a lawyer of you quicker than any other way. And it did. In 1834, Lincoln ran under the Whig Party for the Illinois House of Representatives, which he won. Lincoln started making speeches and became very well known for them. Beyond being a teller of jokes, he crafted his speeches with incredible care in knowing that it would interest the people. As a state lawmaker, he did not get paid a lot, so he became a traveling lawyer to help farmers on what was called the mud circuit. When he arrived, he looked uneducated, but it was all part of his plan. A lawyer who once faced him said any man who took Lincoln for a simple-minded man would soon wake up with his back in a ditch. Lincoln's clients did well, and he earned himself the nickname Honest Abe. In 1838, Lincoln met Mary Todd at a party in Springfield, Illinois. And on November 4th, 1842, Lincoln and Mary Todd were married in a small ceremony on the Todd property. 1 year later, they moved to their first and only house in Springfield, Illinois. Mary and Lincoln would have 4 sons, Robert, Edward, Thomas, and William. Of the 4 boys, sadly, only his son Robert would survive into adulthood. Lincoln continued his journey into politics, serving 1 term in the U.S. House of Representatives, but losing 2 U.S. Senate races. Not one to hold his tongue, he would often publicly speak out against Senator Stephen A. Douglas, a longtime political rival who had different beliefs, especially in regards to slavery. On June 16, 1858, in one such speech, Lincoln crafted his words against Douglas and any Republicans who might think of supporting Douglas, saying, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will be all one thing or all the other." Not many people heard about his House Divided address when he first gave it, but over the next several months, he publicly spread his argument through campaign speeches and the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates. Lincoln emerged from the campaign as a prominent political figure. The national attention he gained from that campaign earned himself the Republican presidential nomination. During the campaign, Grace Bedell, an 11-year-old girl from New York State, advised Lincoln to grow a beard so he'd look more attractive. In Lincoln's response on October 19th, he gave no promises, but later allowed his beard to grow. And shortly after he won the presidential election, so who knows, maybe Grace Bedell knew what she was talking about. Lincoln's primary goal as president was to hold the country together for a long time. It didn't look as if he would succeed. During the early years, the South was winning the war. It wasn't until the Battle of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania during July 1863 that the war turned in favor of the Union. Through speeches such as the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln encouraged Northerners to keep fighting in his famous dedication of the battlefield cemetery. He urged citizens to ensure that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, should not perish from this earth. Earlier that same year, Lincoln called for the end of enslavement of people in his Emancipation Proclamation speech. When the war was nearly over, Lincoln was re-elected in 1864. In his inauguration speech, he laid out the plans to heal the Union, with malice towards none, with charity for all, with firm in the right, as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. A few months later, on April 11, 1865, a shaken Abraham Lincoln told Ward Hill Layman about a dream he had, where he saw himself asking guard by people who were upset, and the guard said that the president had been assassinated. 3 days later, on April 14th, as the Lincolns were getting ready for a night at the theater, Abraham's bodyguard, who led the night off, approached Abraham and urged him not to go to the theater that evening. Despite a warning, a 12-year-old Tad went to see a version of Aladdin at Grover's Theater. Abraham and Mary set off to Ford Theater to see our American cousin. During the third act, an American stage actor and Confederate sympathizer, John Wilkes Booth, was able to maneuver past the main security and head up to the president's booth. At 10:15 p.m., Booth took aim with his .44 caliber single-shot Derringer pistol and shot President Lincoln in the back of the head. Soon after that, General Henry Rathbone tried to stop Booth, but was stabbed in the process. Then Booth jumped over to the railing onto the stage and said "Sic Semper Tyrannis" while holding a bloody knife over his head, and escaped off stage. Well, eventually, he would be found 2 weeks later, he would never be brought to trial because he was shot while trying to escape capture. Dr. Charles Leal and 2 other doctors who were attending the play examined the wound and determined Lincoln couldn't travel far. So he was carried out of the theater and across the street to the Peterson house. Lincoln never regained consciousness, was paralyzed, and struggled to breathe. The doctor at Lincoln's bedside updated the crowd standing vigil outside the Peterson house each hour on the president's condition. His final update came at 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865, that Lincoln had died. His body was prepared and brought by train to Springfield, Illinois. People lined the streets along the route to watch the train car go by. Once the train arrived in Springfield, Illinois, he was buried at Oak Ridge Cemetery. While ending slavery was a huge milestone in Lincoln's presidency, he also did some other amazing things. For example, he started the tradition of pardoning a turkey from the Thanksgiving feast. He might have gotten this idea from his son Tad's pet turkey that freely wandered in the White House grounds. He also established the Department of Agriculture, supported the development of the Transcontinental Railroad, enacted the Homestead Act, which opened up land to settlers. He issued his Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction, with established term for the return to the Union of former Confederates, and crafted the 13th Amendment, which ended the enslavement of people. And as we wrap up this incredible man's life, I want to leave you with some words of his wisdom that still rings true today. You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today. So be sure to put your feet in the right place and stand firm. Thank you for listening.
Good job.